And with that, we move on to the next session, which is on movement building and alliances. For this session, we have Varda Mehrotra, who is the executive director of FIAPO. Varda leads India's National Federation of Animal Organizations, FIAPO, as its executive director, to give form to her passion for wanting to create a world that recognizes the rights of animals. Under her leadership, FIAPO has been recognized as one of the most effective animal charities in the world. She comes with over 15 years of experience in the sector, working with organizations, leading networking, alliance, and movement building both in India and in Scotland. She is the architect of India's largest plant based advocacy network, Living Free, which has created many activist leaders in the country. She has trained hundreds of activists on becoming more effective for the cause of animals. When not working, Varda can be found going on really long walks with her dogs. Varda, over to you.
Hi, my name is Varda Mehrotra and I'm the Executive Director of FIAPO, which is the Federation of Indian Animal Protection Organizations. And I'm absolutely delighted to be talking about movement building and alliances and why they're so important. And I'd like to start by talking about one of my dogs, Becky, who loves to run. She would run for miles through the fields that surround us, and the time that we're out together, it's 100% pure play and unbridled joy. Summers where I live are extremely hot, so Becky would jump into a pool of water for a swim on her way back. But over a year ago, she developed an inflammation on her snout. We found that the bacteria growing in her nasal passages had developed antimicrobial resistance because the pool in which she went for a swim every day collected the runoff from a dairy farm that used antibiotics indiscriminately because of their intensive farming conditions. And while I regularly raised my voice against the intensive confinement, the zero grazing conditions of the dairy, I didn't give the same attention to antimicrobial resistance or AMR. And now it was affecting my own dog. In all kinds of ways, thousands of species of living creatures are negatively affected by animal agriculture. What my dog has suffered is being suffered among so many in the food chain. From tiny tadpoles to the bulbuls who eat them, to the mongoose, the fox, the quails, babblers, my dogs, me, and you. How we tackle this mammoth problem requires a multi pronged approach. Multi pronged meaning strategies which involve people in many corners with various skills, interests, trades, ages, and philosophies. Because working together for enormous issues like this is not just the problem of animal advocates. It's going to require joint work among everyone who values life itself. So let's get together. Today, I want to talk to you about the importance of alliances and networks and building a movement without silos. We need alliances and networks because it's a David versus Goliath fight. Even with the combined might of the entire global animal movement, we are still minuscule against the forces of animal agriculture. We simply cannot afford to not work together in a synchronized, coordinated, and collaborative way. We need networks because we need to make the animal movement relevant to and situated within the context of the world in which we live in. We are facing problems of climate change, consumerism, the pandemic, rise of the right wing nationalism in several countries, and other global movements like Black Lives Matter, ending violence against women, and a movement against consumerism. We cannot afford to adopt an approach of refusing to see or pretend to be unaffected by what is happening around us. We cannot expect to make much headway if we don't participate in the wider agenda and only operate outside of the current global context. We need to focus on networks and alliances because animal protection as a movement within the larger civil society discourse has unfortunately not really been accepted as a legitimate social justice movement. Our movement is often criticized for not being sensitive to other forms of oppression, for example, related to gender and patriarchy. Nor do we critique structural issues resulting from our current global, capitalist, and consumerist world. By refusing to acknowledge the oppression that others face, we fail to get acknowledgement for the oppression animals face at a larger level. We need alliances because the arcs of work and issues are increasingly getting interconnected. Issues of animal welfare, public health, worker rights, environmental justice, climate change are deeply interconnected, and no longer is it effective to deal with them in silos. Trillions of animals suffer untold horrors across the world as they're skinned, killed, milked, beaten, electrocuted, and buried alive. Meanwhile, because of the use of indiscriminate antibiotics used to keep them alive in such intensive conditions, we see rising AMR. This has now been declared as a global health emergency by the UN. 75% of all emerging infectious diseases in humans are zoonotic. The 1 billion farmers and workers in the food production systems are also deeply affected by the injury, exposure to zoonotic diseases, exposure to chemicals, and poor mental health. And our environment is rapidly degrading because of livestock practices. Animal agriculture uses 70% agricultural land and is one of the leading causes of deforestation, biodiversity loss, and water pollution. Raising livestock for meat, eggs, and milk generates 14.5% of global greenhouse gas emissions. About 92% of the fresh water is used for farming purposes, and one third of it is used for rearing livestock and manufacturing animal products. As we are headed towards a planetary disaster, we can no longer afford to ignore these linkages. I lead India's National Federation for Animal Protection Organizations. At FIAPO, I was the architect of the largest grassroots farmed animal advocacy network, which started with 6 activists in six cities and is now in 90 cities with 1,000 plus activists. We have trained hundreds of advocates and NGOs, and our membership stands at 174 animal NGOs across the country. We run expert groups and coalitions and networks to help organizations work together to solve short term and long term challenges. We have engaged with organizations outside animal protection and built bridges with those in the wider civil society space and with the government. Most recently, we are also working towards bringing together stakeholders to develop a holistic response for an intersectional India and just food systems. Building the movement lies at the core of what we do. So, whether it's an alliance or a network or a movement you want to build within your community of NGOs and stakeholders, or with those from other civil society movements, or with others in business, academy, policy, and those affected, here are my top 10 tips for building successful networks. First, practice what you preach. We know it doesn't work to try and advocate, say, for veganism if one isn't vegan themselves. If you don't believe what you say and you don't practice what you say, it shows. People will pick it up and they won't buy into your idea. The same thing applies to a network. If you're creating a network of environmentalists and animal activists, then you can't be holding your first meeting with milky tea in plastic cups. So, the first step towards building a network is to fully imbibe the value of all sides and to live it. Read, discuss, and be open to an exploration. If we can't bring together diverse views as individuals, we certainly cannot expect institutions to do so either. If you pay only lip service, people will catch on to that and won't buy into your unifying idea. Second, have clear objectives. It's extremely important to have very clearly articulated goals. If we don't say what we stand for, people won't know what to support. It's also important to frame the goals in a way that all issues are equally represented. This is important. Don't keep your own agenda central. Give everyone, big or small, equal power, space, and representation. Everyone matters equally. Communicate your objectives clearly to all partners and stakeholders and invite feedback. Third, dialogue, dialogue, dialogue. You will be spending most of your time talking. Communication in any network is key. One of the biggest problems within networks is that participants feel that their issues and viewpoints aren't adequately represented or are being marginalized. This is why equality in a network is extremely crucial. Dialogue also helps us move out of our comfort zone and known positions and expands the boundaries of our work through our network. Facilitating dialogue is thus critical, and the answer to problems often always lies in more communication. Communication also helps build key relationships, and relationships, as we know, are what binds the network. Fourth, find your champions. You will be fully committed to your network, but you will also need to find champions to help you in growing and nurturing the network. Every network is successful because of key people who ensure connections are built and nurtured. Find your champion members and help them weave the network with you. In the first phase, focus on building strong relationships with them. After a period of time, say about 6 months, shift your strategy to help your champions and members develop strong relationships with each other. This is the fundamental approach of weaving any network. Fifth, stick to what you agree on. Chances are that your network is going to be built with diverse actors. People may have different ideologies, priorities, approaches, and views. Except that we will never agree on everything. Find the sliver that there is agreement on and focus on that. This could be a goal, a tactic, it could be long term or it could be short term. But stick to that and learn to accept and help your network to accept that there may be disagreement outside of that. If you try and get agreement on everything, you will get it on nothing. Focus your goal and your network. Sixth, ownership is key and can be lost. This may be obvious, but it's still worth mentioning because once a network loses ownership, it can no longer survive. So don't get complacent once there's been an initial buy in from your members. Ownership of the network and its goals has to be continuously nurtured by you and the other co leaders and champions. Seventh, dive right in. Networks often require conversations with multiple people, getting their opinions, figuring out common issues, and bringing them together. This phase can sometimes significantly and sometimes unnecessarily be extended because, as facilitators, we keep wanting everything to fall in place and all pieces to fit together. So, we are then faced with a catch 22 situation. We need the network to make the decision, but we need the decision to make the network. So, avoid that trap. Pick a small issue and bring people together and get started. Networking is a verb, not a noun. Be realistic. Have realistic expectations on what can be achieved. Sometimes we think of creating the network and that it will solve all our problems, and it doesn't. Keep your expectations real and your objectives achievable. We also need to remember that creating a platform in itself is remarkable. We need to value the smallest achievement towards coordinated and collaborative work because before the network, that was absent. Learn to celebrate the little steps forward. Remember to measure them and document them for impact. Movement, not empire building. Remember, you're building a movement, not an empire for an organization. Remember that and learn the lessons of communications, branding, and taking the back seat and letting partners share the glory. Have clear guidelines on how communications will take place and how members will participate to avoid any difficulty. Lack of understanding and agreement on how shared communications will work can lead to much discord within a network. And finally, be backed with data. We all love the idea of networks, but we all also have been a part of many networks that didn't take off. Let data be your friend. We live in a data and science based society, and data will help you even overcome some of the more philosophical and emotional barriers to alliances. Ultimately, networking and movement building is about the privilege of bringing people together so we can do more for the animals, the planet, and all who inhabit it. It can be slow and it can be frustrating. Believe me, I know. But there is no better time than now, as together we recover from the global COVID crisis and we appreciate, like never before, how lonely it feels to stay apart from each other. Let's make this post COVID era memorable. as the time when friendships, alliances, partnerships, and cooperation lead us to a beautiful future. A future which we cannot attain through war, through isolation, through fearing our neighbors and distrusting different views. From today, let's look for common ground. There is a world of common ground that we share, and it is green, it is peaceful, it is a world that thrives on diversity, and which is equally home to millions of species and billions of individuals who, like you and me, need this fractured planet Earth to heal. Thank you.
Thank you, Varda. Those were really wonderful tips, and I think our audience is going to hugely benefit from them. And questions, there are so many questions actually as far as movements, alliances are concerned. But there is one question that I would like to pose. We need alliances and we need movements, but the challenge remains in getting different stakeholders onto a common platform. So, what is the major challenge that you foresee in the same, and how would you suggest overcoming it?
Thanks, Sarah. I think that's a very common challenge that most of us face when we're trying to bring different stakeholders together. And I think it stems from this discomfort. Every stakeholder needs to feel that they derive value out of a certain alliance or a network or a group that they're participating in. And then if our facilitation of it, or if the coming together sort of somehow marginalizes, or in their perspective, marginalizes their issue, they tend not to be that involved then. So I think one of the most fundamental challenges is to make sure that when we're talking about bringing people together, we are able to keep everybody's point of view together. It's not just sort of like as a facilitator, especially as animal organizations. Of course, we are motivated for the animals, so we tend to sort of focus on that. But if we are, or for farmed animals or whatever may be our issue, it is really important to make sure that everybody feels they are being heard, that their perspective matters, because genuinely, I mean, that's the effort, right? The effort is to build a holistic response. It can't be sort of veiled. It's not a veiled attempt to get the animal agenda through. It's really to build something more holistic. So I think it's really important to make sure that multiple stakeholders get their voices heard, that there is good facilitation. And one of the things that has really benefited me in this context is to always have good, especially in the early stages of the network, is to always have good one-to-one relationships with those stakeholders. Especially in the early days before any key meetings are called with the entire group, making sure that I've been able to speak to the key stakeholders individually, and try to get alignment in advance. So that sort of preparatory work is absolutely critical for a successful engagement with multiple stakeholders.
Absolutely. I think interpersonal relationships is what plays a very significant role in this. That's what
Mm-hmm.
is the crux of it. Coming to the next question, striking a balance between need and greed is a difficult one. And how does one, according to you, ideally go about it, if I can use the word ideally?
Yeah, I mean, in this context, I'm going to understand the word greed as, the need to function as independently as an organization versus as a coalition or a network. So we are wanting to just sort of do our own thing in an area with regards to whatever is the campaign or issue that we're running. And I can understand why one is motivated to do that. It's often more expedient. It is easier in many ways. It is always harder to work with people, So certainly that can be a challenge, because one wants to be effective and impactful, and there's a desire to just sort of go solo and get the job done, I think in terms this tension will always be there. Um, Besides the advantages of everybody coming together and it being more sustainable and stronger, I think things that help make that decision, whether we, at this point in time, should we just sort of do something on our own, or should we do something as a group? Should we prioritize individual organizational greed, or should we think about the larger network need? And I think in that context, it's important to look at every time it comes up. It has to be seen at a case to case basis. I would be very wary in to say that there's a general principle. And to think about the criteria that would apply. So the sort of questions one could ask themselves when this sort of conflict and tension comes alive in our work. Is there a time sensitivity to this issue? What is the consequence of this? What action we take, whether we go solo, whether we go do it with other organizations. What is the consequence? What are the inherent experiences, the inherent political issues that group faces, and to look at those criteria and then to be able to make that decision on a case-to-case basis versus a generic principle that we should always do this or always do that. I think that's something that is important for every organization to develop its own criteria on what is most relevant for them in that context.
Absolutely. And a very important point that you mentioned was practice what you preach. It's sometimes very difficult to do that. Have you, in your long experience, encountered such situations where application of what is being told is really tough?
I mean, all the time, I think I don't believe in perfection. I don't think that we can ever be, I mean, there are so many issues that surround us, whether it is human, animal, environment, every aspect of our lives. And there's so many things that we don't know about. And I don't just mean us as individuals, but us as systems and organizations and movements. And I think the effort I think all of us can be honest about the effort and the intention that we are evolving, and we are continuously moving towards less and less exploitation. And I think that's where sort of more solidarity and more compassion towards other movements, other activists also comes in, because I think this whole idea of purity in the movement, that you must be that there is a perfect vegan somewhere, or there is a perfect environmentalist somewhere, or I think there are certainly those don't exist, and I think we need to be honest with ourselves that it's a continuous journey. And I think it's important to acknowledge that, whether if it's as networks, whether it's as organizations or individuals, at every level, it's an effort that we are making to continuously enhance and improve our response to the complex challenges that we are facing, as people, as the billions of people that live on the planet, and not think that there is a perfect ideal of existence.
Wonderful. The last question to you is that, movements and alliances, you've had a large experience with movements, with building movements and alliances. And there are a lot of challenges that come also, which we also touched upon in one of the previous questions. So how does that impact you as a person? Is there any challenge that really served as a turning point for you personally and changed the way that you look at things? Because I'm sure when we build movements and alliances, there are lots of lessons to be learned. There are lots of do's, lots of don'ts, lots of challenges. So any one instance that you remember and that served as a valuable takeaway for you?
I mean, whenever I get asked a question like this, I always say that I have a longer list of mistakes than sort of things that we got right, because there's just so much learning always in this work. I think one of the key learnings from a very experiential standpoint has been around the sensitivity to communication between different groups. I think that's something that's about how we engage with groups, how the communication happens between people. How do we acknowledge people's contribution, whether in a meeting, whether in a press release, whether in a newsletter, on the website, or a social media post, in any format, and how sensitive that is, and I think that's had that sort of had certainly an impact on me as an individual in being able to understand, just how as people we need that. We need that acknowledgement. We need that acknowledgement for our work, our presence. And so that's certainly been something that's been quite, and it does play a huge role, in making sure that everybody stays together and that conflict is reduced as much as possible.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Varda, for those thoughts and for joining us today. I think your presentation threw a lot of light on some very important points that are absolutely essential for building movements and alliances. So that was Varda Mehrotra, Executive Director of FIAPO. Thank you once again, Varda, for your time and for that fantastic presentation. And on that note, we move on to a break. We will all come back at 14:20 Indian Standard Time. So till then, please do visit our exhibitors. They are all waiting for you eagerly. I just name them quickly: Compassion in World Farming, Eurogroup for Animals, Global Federation of Animal Sanctuaries, Plant-Based Consulting China, Pro-Veg Grants Program, and the World Federation for Animals. Please do have a look and meet all our exhibitors, and till 14:20 hours Indian Standard Time. Bye from our side. Thank you.